All right, thank you everyone for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn. Today we have guest speakers, City Manager Kurt Triplett and Fire Chief Joe Sanford. Kurt Triplett was hired in June 2010 as Kirkland's 4th City Manager. And as City Manager, Mr. Triplett administers and manages the city according to the mission, policies, and budget adopted by the City Council. Mr. Triplett oversees the operation of 12 departments, over 600 employees, and a $751 million biennial budget. Mr. Triplett was awarded the 2016 Award for Excellence by Washington City and County Management Association. Joe Sanford has been the Kirkland Fire Department Chief since 2016. He has held every rank in the Kirkland Fire Department since being hired in 1981, including Lieutenant, Captain, Battalion Chief, Deputy Chief, and Interim Chief. During Sanford's tenure with Kirkland, he was named Chief of the Year in 2012 and 2014, and was also Firefighter of the Year in 1989 and 2001. Welcome to our speakers.
Thank you.
All right, shall I go ahead and start? Or?
Go ahead and start.
Thank you. So before I begin on the fire ballot measure, I just wanted to thank the Chamber, first of all, for hosting us, and also for our partnership that we've had over the last 7 months with COVID. First, the partnership with the Chamber, where they provided grants through private fundraising to help businesses in need. And then just to remind folks that the City of Kirkland has the Kirkland Cares Small Business Relief Fund that we've also been doing in partnership with the Chamber, which is money that we are using CARES Act money passed through from the state to the City of Kirkland to provide $5,000 grants to businesses in need. And we received 275 applications, and our city staff is actually going through those applications now, and we'll be providing almost $1 million of funds and direct grants to the city businesses over the next couple weeks. Probably by early October, we'll have those grants out. So really appreciate the partnership with the Chamber, and we very much appreciate everyone who chooses to have their business here in Kirkland. So thank you for that. Okay, so today I am here to talk along with Chief Sanford about the fire ballot measure. And I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. And first, check that you can see it, everybody okay? And that you can hear me okay. All right. So Chief Sanford and I have been alternating these presentations, and he can chime in at any time. I have about 20 minutes of presentation, followed by time for questions and answers. But if anyone has a question while we're going, please go ahead and put it in the chat. And Andriana Campbell, who's our management analyst, will be watching that, can read a question to me, and I'll stop and be happy to answer the question as we go. Okay. So before I begin, just a reminder that Washington state law says that once the City Council places a ballot measure on the ballot, city staff and resources cannot be used to advocate for or against a ballot measure. But state law also does say that we can provide information so that voters know what's in the ballot measure, and they can obviously then choose to decide for themselves. So tonight's presentation is just an informational presentation of how did we get here and what are the elements that are actually in the ballot measure, followed by questions, but I will not be advocating for or against this ballot measure. So as many of you know, every 2 years, the City Council adopts a work program that identifies the top priorities for the city and what we are supposed to accomplish over the next 2 years. So in 2018, as part of the work program for 19 and 20, the #1 priority of the City Council was to improve fire and emergency medical services throughout the city. And there are 3 key elements to that. The first was to construct a new fire station, Station 24, which many of you know we did acquire that, and that site is actually under construction. It is the Rite Aid site just across from Juanita Elementary School, and that's fully paid for by the City Council by real estate excise taxes. The second element was to site a new Station 27, and we have actually acquired a site through an interfund loan, and building a station on that site would be one element of this ballot measure. And then the third element was to explore a 2020 ballot measure for fire station modernization and enhanced operations. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Before I do, this is the actual information that the voters are going to see. This is on the left. You see the actual ballot title. So City of Kirkland Proposition 1, a levy lid lift for fire and emergency medical services and facilities. And that ballot measure, as you can see, is 23.5 cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation on a home. It will generate about $77.3 million worth of annual revenue, and the impact to a median home is about $171 annually. And that median impact, the median home is determined by the King County assessor for the city of Kirkland. There are two critical goals of the levy. The first is to improve fire and emergency medical response times throughout the entire city. And second, equally important, is to protect firefighter health and safety so that our firefighters are available to respond when you need them. Everything that I'm going to cover and everything that went into the development of this measure is actually on our Kirkland website. So for those of you who would like a lot more information, you can find it at kirklandwa.gov under Fire and Emergency Medical Services ballot measure. So please feel free to peruse that, and it can answer almost any questions that anyone might have. One of the things I like best about this measure is this is really by the community for the community. So the way the council chose to explore the fire ballot measure was to create a group we called the Community Safety Advisory Group that affectionately became known as the ComSAG. And it was chaired by our very own mayor, Penny Sweet. And it was over 30 people from every neighborhood organization and the chamber, KDA, Kiwanis, every stakeholder we could think of made up this group. And this group spent 5 months having 8 3-hour evening meetings, learning everything there was to know about the fire service and the challenges it faced. And every recommendation that is included in this ballot measure was a recommendation made by the Community Safety Advisory Group. The final meeting of this group and their final recommendation was on February 26th. And as we all know, 3 days later, on February 29th, we had our first case of COVID-19 at the Life Care Center, and we became, for a while, the epicenter of the pandemic in the entire United States. And Chief Sanford and I are more than happy to talk about that. It's a crazy time that extends till today, but we wanted to make sure people understood the impact this had immediately on the fire department in late February and early March. So because of the COVID-19 outbreak, we actually had at one point 34 firefighter EMTs in quarantine or isolation. And we had to take our entire Station 21 offline, and it was a place that we housed firefighters who were in quarantine. So within a 2-week period, we lost about 1/3 of our force to quarantine, and one of our 5 fire stations had to be set aside. And that was a real impact for us that made us really think differently about this ballot measure and how it could be beneficial. But because the ComSAG had done their entire work pre-pandemic, one of the things the City Council is really concerned about is now that we all knew about the pandemic, does it change the mind of the community group about whether or not this should go to the ballot or if there should be any changes to the ballot measure? So we actually did a survey of our Community Safety Advisory Group members. And of the 24 folks who were able to respond, 20 out of the 24 said that they felt that these investments were so important that they should proceed anyway. And this happened in April in the middle of the pandemic. And that they still felt that 2020 was the right time. And in fact, many of these investments are actually beneficial for responding to a pandemic as well. And I'm going to talk about that later on. The City Council also asked us to make sure we checked in with the community. So we did a statistically valid survey of over 500 residents, and we asked them whether these investments made sense, were important to them in 2020. And this happened in April and May, again, in the height of the pandemic. So it was definitely very much on the public's mind. And what you can see from this slide, I won't go through all of the details, but every investment that the Community Safety Advisory Group had made, except for the Fire Training Center, received 2/3 support as being very important or important to the public. And as a result of all of this outreach and the survey and an online survey that we did, the City Council determined that it made sense to continue to go forward and place this measure on the ballot. We did, however, not include the Fire Training Center in the final recommendation. And that was not only to respond to public input, but also to make sure we could save some money. Some people have asked about why go to the ballot, particularly for the fire stations. And we wanted to remind folks that fire stations have traditionally been funded, not just in Kirkland, but pretty much by every jurisdiction in Washington through ballot measures. So every current fire station in the city of Kirkland was funded through a voter-approved measure. The only station where that won't be true is Station 24, which we're in the process of beginning to construct. But our current stations were all built by measures, and this is also true of Bellevue and Redmond and others. Everybody has used them because the capital investments are just so large. It's very difficult for government to do it without going to the ballot. But the city of Kirkland takes going to the ballot very seriously. And this was really important for the city council to say, we need to do everything we can first before we ask the voters for additional resources. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the investments our city council has made since 2010, just before annexation. You can see in 2010, we had 66 police officers and 85 firefighters. And in 2018, that went up to 100 police officers and 102 firefighters. So we've added almost $15.5 million to the budget and a number of firefighters and police officers prior to ever coming to the public to ask for any kind of revenue. On the capital side, that was also our priority. So we had a partnership with Fire District 41 to set aside some money to renovate Fire Station 25. I see our former Fire Commissioner, Toby Nixon, is on the line, and he was one of the folks who we partnered with to make that happen. So thank you, former Commissioner Nixon, now Councilmember Nixon. The City Council has also set aside over $20 million of real estate excise tax to build this brand new Fire Station 24 on the Rite Aid site up in Juanita. And shortly after annexation, they issued councilmanic debt to rebuild the Kirkland Justice Center, which now houses our new municipal court, our new police headquarters, and our expanded jail. So all that to show that when we go to the ballot, we do so only after we think it's the only way we can really bring the public the investments that they expect of us to keep people safe. How does this ballot measure compete with other ballot measures in the past? You can see the Kirkland Prop 1 down here at the bottom, again, 23.5-cent levy. I think, can you see my scroller here? Is that something that's, okay. So if you look at the middle, you can see in 2018, one comparable set of levies was from Bothell. They did a 26-cent bond and a 44-cent levy. So about 70 cents, major investment in public safety for them. That was police and fire. And probably the thing that's very comparable was the King County Medic 1 levy in 2019, which was 26.5 cents, which was recently passed by the voters. The King County Street levy way back in 2012 was 20 cents. So the cost of levy was something that was very important to the Community Safety Advisory Group. And so all of the investments that were presented to them by staff, they did not include in their recommendations. They actually elected to defer some of those investments. And then the City Council, as I said, also did not include the training center. So it mattered a lot to the Community Safety Advisory Group that this was an affordable investment, and it mattered a lot to the City Council that it was also affordable. Before I jump into the challenges, just a reminder that about 75% of our calls that we receive from 911 are aid calls. This has held true over the decades. It usually runs around 75, 76%. And those are some medical calls, and then about 20% are fire calls. And the other 5% are related. So they're things like hazardous material response, or there might be a tree down, or as we just had a couple of days ago, flooding, where the fire department will respond to help. So this is how Kirkland is currently set up on the fire side. We have 5 fire stations. You can see there, and I want to draw your attention to Fire Station 22 in Houghton for the discussion here. We traditionally staff our stations with a 3-person, what's called a cross-staffed crew of 3. This is the crew we have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so when a medical call comes into Station 22, these 3 firefighters get on the aid car and they respond, but that leaves the fire engine at 22 now out of service. And similarly, if a fire call comes in, these 3 firefighters jump on the fire engine and they respond to the call, and that leaves the aid car out of service. And this is a very traditional method. It's used by our neighbors as well. And it works really, really well for the first call. But if a second call comes into the Houghton Station 22 area, there's no longer any firefighters there to respond. And so we have to respond from a station that's farther away, like Finn Hill or like Forbes Creek, and that increases the response times. Station 27, you can see we have 6 firefighters there. It is actually a double station, so you can think of it as 2 crews of 3. And we have a similar issue there. 3 go out, 3 stay back. But it has twice the number of calls and twice the territory of any normal station. The last thing I'll identify is these firefighters with a 24 on their chests are firefighters that will be allocated to the new Station 24 when it's built. So we already have 2 of the 3 firefighters set aside, and the 3rd firefighter to staff that station is one of the elements in the ballot measure. One question we get is, who is this person up here? This is actually the battalion chief. So every shift there's a battalion chief that's in charge of everybody in there stationed at Station 26. So as Chief Sanford says very eloquently, there's been 2 major changes to responding to fires over the last couple of years and impacts to the fire service. The first is the issue of flashover, which is how long does it take before a room combusts in such a way that it's not survivable. So I'm gonna run a little video for you here. And in this video, there's a small fire started in 2 different rooms. The room on the left is called the legacy room, and this is a room you'd have found in the 70s or 80s, which is a room where the furniture is made of pretty much organic products. So made of wood, materials used are cotton and wool. And the material on the right, in what we call the modern room, is made of modern synthetics and petrochemicals. So that couch will have a stuffed petrochemical foam, and the materials on it are also synthetic. And basically a couch today is really solidified gasoline. So you can see after 2 minutes how far the flame is beginning to burn in the modern room, and you can also start to see this gas, which is now smoke, coming out the top. And this smoke is actually just gas that has not yet burned, and this can combust. And so flashover occurs when this black smoke finally catches fire. And when that happens, the entire room bursts into flame, and it's no longer survivable by any human. Even firefighters in full gear can only survive 10 to 15 seconds after flashover. So the whole goal of the fire service is to get there before this kind of flashover can happen, so that both anyone in the house and the firefighters are safe. You can see right now at 3 minutes and 22 seconds, the entire room is almost engulfed, and now the flames themselves have caught the smoke, and the whole room is now about to go into flashover. And at that point, it's not possible for anyone to survive. You can see on the left, at the same 3 minutes and 45 seconds, we've only got the curtains on fire. And so if a firefighter was there, or even a person with a really good fire extinguisher might be able to stop that fire before anyone got hurt, or even before there was much property damage. So if you're gonna run this video all the way to the end, you'd see that the time to flashover in the legacy room was just a little over 29 minutes, whereas the time to flashover in the modern room is about 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So that is a huge change over the last few decades, where they used to have 20 to 30 minutes to get to you. Now they need to get to you within 3 to 4 minutes for flashover. This is also true for an aid car responding to something like a cardiac arrest. Brain death actually occurs in about 6 minutes. So everything in the Kirkland Fire Service is built around this idea that we want everybody to be within 4 minutes of a fire station. So every business, every resident wants to be in 4 minutes of a fire station. And that's a key element of this ballot measure. So what I have now is a map of our current 5 stations and the territories they cover. And so each fire station is approximately where the number is, and you can see the neighborhoods that they're in. And the colors surrounded by the thick gray band show how far that station can go in 4 minutes. So everything within those bands is within a 4-minute response time of that station. And where the 2 bands meet means it's an equally distant travel time. And you can see we actually have pretty good coverage throughout the city, but up here in the north of Finn Hill and in the north of Kingsgate, we definitely still have some areas we can't reach, and down south in South Rose Hill, there's also some locations we can't quite get to in the 4-minute response time. But if there's a second call that comes in once the station is out, that creates a bigger travel time if someone from North Rose Hill has to travel into Forbes Creek. So we have pretty good coverage for the first call, have some gaps, and we have a lot of challenges when you have a second or a third call coming to that same territory. So when you add the new fire station that has been fully funded by the City Council, this new Station 24, what you can see is it reduces the territory that Station 27 has to serve, but it also now allows a whole larger set of territory to be in this new 4-minute response time. This new Station 24 is also ideally located at backup Station 25 and Station 21, so it improves response times throughout the entire city. Should the ballot measure pass, one of the elements is to build this new relocated Station 27 in Totem Lake. And that not only improves the response times in Kingsgate, but it also places the station next to the huge investments happening at the village of Totem Lake and other places in the Totem Lake Urban Center. And you can see again, smaller territories for all of them. So should we have the 2 new stations in place and fully staffed, the entire city would benefit as we have more firefighters to respond to more places more often. But just getting there is not all. Once you get there, what you can see is we have new, far more complex mixed-use developments going on. So if a fire engine or an 8-car pulls up to the front of the village of Totem Lake, it's not the same as going into the front door of a house and knowing where the fire is or knowing where the patient is. They've now got to make their way through all kinds of challenges, such as long hallways and elevators and parking lots. And so there's a huge new complexity being added by this development. We're also seeing an aging population in Kirkland. And as we're making investments to serve that population with assisted living facilities, as an example, this is the Aegis building that's being built on Lake Washington Boulevard today. Not only are these bigger buildings with more residents, but the aging residents provide much more of a challenge. There's more medical calls for these residents, and they're also harder to help remove should there be a fire in the building. And so the summary of all that is that Kirkland is becoming far more complex. The calls are more complex. And so station location is critical, but so is more staffing and training to help serve the larger evolving and growing Kirkland. The second big change that the chief and the firefighters talk about is the impact of being a firefighter on the health and safety of our firefighters. So we're seeing a major increase in the incidence of cancer in the firefighters. You can see on the left a list of how much more likely a firefighter is to get the kind of cancers than the regular population. And studies show that this can be linked back to these toxics that we showed about what's off-gassing when you have a fire with all these new synthetics. That dark black smoke is also coating firefighters with these toxic chemicals. And as a firefighter enters into the heat, every 5 degrees that the heat that rises, skin becomes 400% more absorbent. And so the firefighters are also absorbing these chemicals at the same time they're trying to fight the fire. And sadly today, 56% of all line of duty deaths are now from cancer in the fire service. Chief Sanford actually took this photo. This is a photo from 1989. And you can see there are 7 firefighters here. This is not just a national problem. This is a Kirkland problem. These firefighters went a training fire. And of these 7, 2 have really tragically passed away from cancer. And a third is actually fighting a brain tumor right now. So it's a critical issue for Kirkland. It's a critical issue for the nation. And we just have to do better. And that's part of the reason for this ballot measure. So I'm going to now transition into the elements inside the ballot measure. And this is a quick summary. So you can see we'll be adding 20 new firefighters that will be spread out in different ways that I'll talk about. And we have about $55 million worth of capital investments in the ballot measure. And all of that is paid for with the 23.5 cents. You see at the bottom that generates about $7.3 million. And approximately half of that goes to paying for the firefighters. And approximately half of that would go to paying for the capital investments in the fire stations. So first, the investments in the firefighters and their safety. So one of the things that we'll be doing with this ballot measure, should it pass, is include a huge stockpile of the pandemic personal protective equipment. Kirkland was very fortunate when the Life Care Center issue started to happen that we had stockpiled pandemic personal protective equipment for the potential Ebola outbreak from a decade earlier. And we're fortunate that that did not happen in the United States. And so we actually had a stockpile to draw on, but that was almost entirely depleted fairly quickly. And so one of the things we've learned from that is we want to have a lot of this on hand to be stockpiled for COVID and any other kind of outbreak that we might receive. We would also hire 20 additional firefighter EMTs, and I'm going to talk about how they would be allocated in a second. But clearly, if we'd had these 20 additional firefighters at the time that 34 of our firefighters were in quarantine, that would have provided a huge backup for our ability to respond during the pandemic. But I spend just a little bit on this slide because it tells you what would happen should the ballot measure pass and where all of these investments would go. So first, we have the new fire station in Juanita, Station 24. Again, that's actually fully funded by the city. So it's going to get built no matter what. And you can see again, the 2 firefighters with the 24s are already funded. So the station will have 2 out of the 3 positions that it needs. With the addition of the 20 firefighters, we'd be able to add a 3rd firefighter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and fully staff this new Station 24 in Juanita. The other way these firefighters will be allocated is we'd be adding 2 firefighters at Station 22, which we talked about earlier. So instead of having 3, there would be 5 firefighters there, and this is what creates what's called a dedicated aid car. So if a medical call comes in, these 2 firefighters will be able to hop on the aid car and respond to the call, and 3 firefighters will be left behind. So should a second call come in, whether it's a fire call or an aid call, these firefighters could either take the engine and respond. We have a similar issue at Station 27. You can see that that would be a brand new station built in Totem Lake. And we'd also have 5 firefighters at that station, and there'd be a dedicated aid car there as well. So 2 firefighters there would also be able to respond, leaving 3 back for a subsequent call. And the reason 22 and 27 are the places where we'd have these crews of 5 is those are our 2 busiest stations, which receive the most number of calls. And then the final investment would be to add a 4th firefighter to the Station 26 here in Rose Hill. And 4 firefighters are not quite as good as 5, but it does still allow you to have 2 firefighters respond to an aid car and have 2 remaining who could respond to a second aid call if it came in. So the result of these 20 firefighters spread across the city is a dramatic increase in our ability to respond to those primary calls and then secondary calls when they come in, and really improve response times throughout the city. The fire station investments themselves are really then investments in firefighter health and safety. So we want to make sure that these stations are not collapsing on the firefighters and the vehicles in an earthquake, and also that these stations are not increasing the causes of cancer in our firefighters. So everything I'm going to talk about now is designed to help reduce that set of cancers and also make sure that our stations will be there in the earthquake. So our 5 fire stations that were currently built were all built in the 90s or earlier, and they're not up to the current National Fire Protection Association standards or critical infrastructure standards. And until we actually remodeled Station 25 in 2018, none of our current stations were remodeled after the initial ballot measures that built them. And so what we've learned today is one needs to make sure that you isolate the living quarters, which is the green area in the back where the eating quarters and the work quarters and the sleeping quarters are, from the what's called the hot zones where the toxics are coming when firefighters return from fighting a fire. The same technology is also really helpful in fighting a pandemic, because if firefighters come back and they have a virus or something, by having these hot, warm, and cold zones, you can contain the toxics or the virus in the fire station bays and not have it come back into the living quarters. So an example of what we have today, when we were focused mostly on turnout times, is the current bunker gear is placed in the bays right next to the vehicles. And so one of the things you can see here, this is the fire engine Station 26, is the exhaust pipe. So the exhaust pipe, when this engine is on, is actually blowing diesel fumes, which are also a carcinogen, directly onto the bunker gear that firefighters use. You can also see the door here on the left, the far left, that's actually the door into the living quarters. And so diesel fumes and toxic fumes coming off of firefighter gear can then also seep into fire station living quarters. And these are the kinds of things, together with fighting the fires themselves, that we know are beginning to cause that increase in cancer in firefighters. On the diesel side, the investments are fairly straightforward. You need to have a system that captures the exhaust and takes the toxic fumes up out of the system and filters them. So that is part of the investments that we'll be making, is that all of our vehicles will have these capture systems, so the diesel fumes won't be an issue. But we're seeing right now, even the stations in the 90s were built with the same theory in mind. So you can see the bunker gear alongside the vehicles right next to the exhaust pipes, and again, close to the living quarters. And this was the situation we had in Station 25. You can see that photo on the left, and you can see the photo on the right. There's no bunker gear in the bay, right? So where did it go, and why is that better? So the bunker gear went into a negative pressure room right next door. And so now if you open the door to this room, it actually it sucks the air inside. So if any of these are off-gassing some of these chemicals from fighting a fire, that's captured inside and sent through a filtration system. It's also a warm, dry room, so the bunker gear dries much quicker, and it keeps the firefighters much healthier and safer over time, and it also protects the investment in this gear because this gear is really expensive. One of the questions we've been asked is, why are these renovations so expensive? And the answer to that I'm going to show you is what we did with Station 25. These are not kitchen remodels. These are major reconstructions to make sure that these fire stations do not collapse in an event. So there's a couple of photos from the renovation we did at Station 25. You can see almost a complete taking it down to almost the foundations in many places and completely rebuilding it to add additional space. We had to dig up the entire 50-year-old sewer system and completely replace it. We had to remove the entire brick wall off the back so that we could get the additional space necessary to modernize the station. We had to build in these hot, warm, and cold rooms, so really extensive remodeling inside the station to create these new negative pressure areas and places for firefighters to wash themselves in their gear and have washers and dryers for their bunker gear. And then most importantly, stations do collapse, particularly brick stations do collapse in earthquakes, and we don't want firefighters or equipment trapped when we want them to be able to respond and help other people in an earthquake. So a significant investment in the seismic safety of the station. So you can see these metal tie rods up here in Station 25 are all throughout the building, and that holds the station from shifting when there's an earthquake. On the inside, you can see this vertical, wait, is that horizontal or vertical? That's vertical. What on the inside, where we also tie the walls together, also with these tie rods, and that stops it from twisting. So all this is designed to make sure that if there's a major seismic event, the fire station will stand up and firefighters will be able to get out and come help those who need them. Final example, we have before this beam, you see this big white beam on the right. This is barely tacked to the wall, and if that wall moved an inch or two, that beam would come down and the entire roof would collapse. And you can see down at the bottom the kinds of investments we made to make sure that these beams are held to the wall with modern steel and will withstand those kinds of seismic events. So that's the before and after. You can see after this investment, we have a very modern station that's designed for maximum firefighter health and safety, and it's now the most popular station for firefighters. This is the place they want to bid, the place they want to be, and this is the standard we want to reach with the rest of our renovations. Station 22 is of the same vintage as 25, so it's going to have a very similar renovation, which is why it's a $9 million reconstruction. Station 21 in Forbes Creek is a more modern construction, is a little bit lightweight, so it's not exactly the same, but it also needs major seismic retrofits, and it also needs this modernization to create the hot, warm, and cold rooms to separate the toxics from the living room. And Station 26 was built about the same time as 21 in Rose Hill, and that also needs the same sorts of renovations that 21 is going to need. And finally, my last 3 slides, we would be building a new Station 27 at this location that you can see up here, which is already acquired. And this station would help us improve response times at Kingsgate, but also serve all of the development that's happening now around the village of Totem Lake. And we've actually acquired this property. We've actually purchased this medical dental building with a interfund loan. And so should this ballot measure pass, we would tear down this building and we replace it with the fire station. But we actually have a purpose for Station 27. Again, these are learning the lessons of the pandemic. We would actually keep the current Station 27 in Juanita, and it would actually be a place where we would stockpile the personal protective equipment. There are 10 living rooms or sleeping quarters in this building, which would be then available for isolation and quarantine. And it's also a place we'd be able to store reserve apparatus. So our reserve aid card or reserve engine could also stay in there. So there's also a fueling station here. So this station will become incredibly important for us in responding to things like pandemics and would definitely not go to waste. So that's a very quick overview. I gave you in 30 minutes what the ComSec spent 30 hours on, and I know I covered a lot. So the chief and I are here and happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. All right, I'm going to stop sharing so that people can ask.
Got an eye on the chat. So far, no questions.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. If we don't have any questions yet, I know Mayor Penny Sweet wanted to say a few words, so maybe we'll have her do that while some folks are thinking about some questions that they have.
What I thought I would do is, we've got a fairly large group working on the pro campaign, and what I thought I'd do is I'm just going to read a portion of the mailing that we will be sending out to a lot of folks. It's been 30 years since the Kirkland Fire Department last asked voters to help and fund critical services and infrastructure. Over these 3 decades, our city's population has swelled, our geographic region has almost doubled, emergency calls have steadily increased, and the COVID-19 pandemic exposed gaps in everyone's preparedness. Meanwhile, critical resources that our firefighters and EMTs need for responding efficiently to emergencies and for being healthy and safe have remained mostly unchanged. The result? Our EMTs and firefighters don't have the ability to respond to portions of Kirkland fast enough to meet life-saving benchmarks and industry standards. A variety of health and safety standards are no longer up to date for the women and men who risk their own safety every day for our community. And 4 of the 5 fire stations in Kirkland are currently not up to professional seismic code. The overwhelmingly recommended solution is a tax measure on the November 3rd, 2020 ballot. This recommendation came from a community safety advisory group comprised of 30 residents who represented neighborhood and business groups that dedicated more than 5 months determining the most impactful investments. Once the COVID-19 pandemic hit, this recommendation was further reinforced. The depletion of critical PPE, realized staff shortages due to quarantines, and further surveying throughout the community revealed even stronger support for the proposal. The proposed measure would cost less than $15 per month for a median value home and include the following key elements: hiring of 20 additional firefighter EMTs to staff the stations help staff the stations across from Oneida Elementary. The replenishing and stockpiling of pandemic response equipment such as disposable masks, gowns, and gloves, relocation and construction of Station 27 to a site east of 405, which would improve emergency response time and be crucial in response to natural disasters, especially if the freeway were to collapse. A variety of health and safety modernizations and seismic renovations at stations. Please join us in support of the City of Kirkland Proposition 1. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Penny. Just check in and see if we have any questions from anyone. And just a reminder that Penny was reading that as a private citizen, not as mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toby, for putting that in the chat. And the Public Policy Committee of the Chamber of Commerce has endorsed this measure. We do feel that this critical infrastructure is important to keeping especially our business community safe. So I do want to put that out there. If we don't have any questions, then I don't see anything coming up on the chat. It looks like you covered everything very well, Kurt.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present. And if anyone wants to meet in a smaller group or has further questions, the chief or I are happy to meet with anybody anytime to provide more information. So just let us know.
All right, and with that, we will be sure to send this out to our full membership. So thank you so much for your presentation today, and thank you to everyone who attended. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
And thank you, Chamber.